Hi, everybody. This is a sermon review from John chapter 16, verses 16 to 22. Taught this on September 27, Sunday, 2015. The message is about Jesus turning sorrow into joy. This is the setting. The disciples had been with Jesus 3.5 years. He's going to die, be placed in a grave or in a tomb for 3 days, be raised from the dead. 40 days later, he'll ascend to heaven to be at the right hand of the Father, the place of rule and reign and honor. This change is going to be dramatic for the disciples. Their 3.5 years with Jesus was unparalleled, and it's going to plunge them into sorrow, confusion, even opposition during their sorrow. But Jesus promises to turn their sorrow into joy. Verse 16, Jesus said to them, "A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me, because I go to the Father." He's explaining to them about his soon coming death the next day, his time in the tomb, his resurrection, and his eventual ascension. And because all of that was true, they wouldn't see him for a short time, but then they would see him. They have no reference point for resurrection. They have no idea what he's saying. This was unparalleled and had never happened in human history. Resuscitation from the dead, yes. Resurrection from the dead with a glorified body had never happened. So they're very confused, very understandable. Oftentimes when there's a big change in our life, life's going on and something sad happens, a big change, we are confused. We don't understand what's going on. The same was true with the disciples. Verse 17, some of the disciples said among themselves, "What is this that he says to us? A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me, and because I go to the Father." They said, therefore, "What is this that he says, a little while? We do not know what he's saying." Two things to note on this. As followers of Jesus, they were being plunged into big change, and it brought confusion. If you're a follower of Jesus, sometimes we are in seasons of confusion because of huge change, a tragedy, a loss, whatever it might be. The second thing is this: they are quoting the Word of God. They are quoting the words of Jesus, but those words don't make sense to them yet because they haven't gone through the trial. So Jesus gives them the words to help them go through the trial, to know what to expect. But until they go through the trial, you really don't have that experience of understanding how those words of God apply. May we be gracious with ourselves and with others who are going through trials, who can quote the Word of God, but don't yet have the impact and the experience of what those words mean. If they continue to hold on in faith, they will experience the truth of those words. It just takes some time sometimes. Verse 19, Jesus knew what they desired to ask him, and he said to them, "Are you inquiring among yourselves about what I said? A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while you will see me." So he understood. He understood they were confused. Take note, he doesn't scold them. So if you're a follower of Jesus, and sometimes you're confused, you're in good company. Be gracious with yourself and be gracious with other Christians who are in a state of confusion at times. Also know this: Jesus notices and he cares. Verse 20. "Most assuredly I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice, and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned into joy." Not only are they going through big change that plunges them into sorrow and brings confusion, but they will experience opposition during their time of sorrow, during their time of lamenting, during their time of weeping. It's hard enough to suffer when people support you. It's more difficult when there's no support. It's even more difficult when people rejoice over the thing that's breaking your heart. So the Bible is amazingly relevant and current and understands our frail humanity. In all of this, Jesus does not scold these guys, saying things like, "What's wrong with you? You need to man up. You need to be tougher. You need to not be sorrowful. You need to not cry. You need to not lament." He doesn't scold them about that. He allows for their humanity. It's part of what we are. May we allow it in ourselves. May we allow it in others. Jesus describes this process of going through sorrow, and it is a process. A woman, when she's in labor, has sorrow because her hour has come, but as soon as she has given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being is born into the world. It's not that she doesn't remember the anguish, but it's that the anguish is minimized by the joy of what it brings. My wife has had 3 kids. I've been there for the birth of all of them. Labor is amazing. I salute all you mothers out there. But when Debbie had our first child, Sarah, I watched her go through labor, and as soon as Sarah was born, she said, let's have another one, and I couldn't believe it. The joy that came forth from the labor eclipsed the difficulty of the labor. Now, a woman knows what to hope for. She hopes for a baby. The disciples had no idea what to hope for. Jesus had told them, but there was nothing in their experience that would point them in this direction. Why am I saying this? Sometimes we suffer in much confusion, but we need to labor through it, somehow holding on to the words that God has given us. Now, notice also, well, let me go on. Let me read the next verse. Therefore, you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you. Jesus says here that he doesn't say, I'm going to replace your joy, or excuse me, I'm going to replace your sorrow with something. Oftentimes when we are sorrowing, we want to replace the sorrow with some other joy, a substitute. There's a breakup in a marriage, somebody goes looking for a substitute. Whatever the case may be, I'm drawing blanks. Jesus doesn't say here he's going to replace their joy. He says he's going to turn their sorrow into joy. What's the greatest joy of a mother in labor? Not that the car payment was made or that the kids got good grades. The greatest joy for a mother in labor is that the baby is born healthy. What's the greatest joy for a parent longing after a prodigal child? Not that their other kids are doing okay, but that prodigal comes back to Jesus. Jesus turns our sorrow into joy. Notice the process, and I'll close. Things were going well, 3.5 years of an amazing life with Jesus. He announces his death. Sudden change brings confusion. They know the word of God. They're quoting it back to Jesus, but it hasn't hit them yet. They not only don't have support from their neighbors, but they have opposition from their neighbors. They're also suffering as individuals. Proverbs 14:10 says, the heart knows its own bitterness and no one shares its joy. So even though they suffered as a group, Peter suffered differently than John. John suffered differently than Thomas, so on and so forth, because they all had individual lives. They're plunged into the darkest place, but they persevere through it. They don't try to cheer themselves up. They don't go out and proselytize. They're really going through it. In fact, they're fearful for their lives, but they don't quit. And their source of sorrow becomes their greatest source of joy. It is noted by Charles Spurgeon that in the rest of the New Testament, any time that the death of Jesus is spoken about, it's not spoken about as a regret, but it's spoken about as a victory. The victory eclipsed the sorrow. I pray that Jesus will do that in your life and that you let him do that in your life. Thanks for listening.